Kiskitseksto natkanaiksematsä nohpua. Annohka ksistekoi tseksei times ni tuutus. Ikstunat suka pian nohka muka. Ihka no, kina aamu kina atsemu ihka. Kistunnu ni tsetapi ikaikitu meitä kitatsemu ihkannu. I just wanted to say that I really appreciate being invited here this evening. Thanks to the elder for the prayer. We always believe in our culture to start any kind of an event by acknowledging our Great Spirit. And that's how come I'm standing here tonight. I gave my life to him 45 years ago when I threw in the towel, being an alcoholic, came out of residential school, 14 years of violence, abuse, sexual abuse, name it. It took a lot of courage, a lot of guts to throw in the towel and say, okay, I need your help, Creator. I was pleading to him, please help me. Noxpumukit, ginnonis tebetapiup. Help me, Creator. And that's how come took me a while to really look at my life. I knew I had a purpose in life because I grew up in a very sheltered home. My parents were members of sacred societies in Siksika. I have my sister here, Eileen, and a relative from Blood Reserve. He's a council member. I forget his first name, but his last name is Weaselhead. And I explained it to him how closely related. I met him a few years ago. It's always good to have our men come to these kind of gatherings because it's we really have to look at the denial. It's about time men come to support us. And why I say that, in my marriage, I suffered family and domestic violence. My husband, Francis, he finally, a few years ago, I'll say about 25 years ago, he sobered up, and today he's sober, and he really appreciates the life that I have. He supports me. And I have so much freedom. I can do what I want to do. Control is a form of abuse. And all these different experiences I had as a young woman and as a woman growing up, finally I had that freedom from alcohol. And I dedicated my life to this kind of work that I do. It's very frustrating because a lot of people do not understand that family and domestic violence is a big problem in our reserves everywhere. I run into it too, those attitudes. You know, you could just feel it wherever I go, Calgary, whatnot. Those kind of behaviors used to bother me, but not today, because I know who I am. I work for the Creator every day. I won't be here today if I hadn't. And I went back to my traditional and spiritual way when I started my recovery, my sobriety. It was so important because at the residential school, I wasn't allowed to speak my language. I used to get a gold star on Friday if I didn't speak Blackfoot all week, but I never lost it. And there was so many things that happened. There was a late sister of mine. She died at the residential school with a broken neck. No investigation, nothing. I had a cousin who's been missing in Duck Lake on the Beardies Reserve since February 1961. How many years ago is that? No investigation. I never had a closure because my cousin Marie was like my sister. She always protected me when we were at the residential school. So look at all those years. I personally suffered family and domestic violence. I suffered sexual abuse, all forms of abuse, bullying for being half Cree and Blackfoot. I suffered bullying at the residential school. My spirit was broken all those years. So when I left, what did I do? I started to drink. I thought by drinking would take away the pain. No, it never did. It just got worse, and I was very violent. I didn't care who I got into a fight with. As long as I could hit somebody, I felt good. It went on for such a long time. I really had to look at myself. I had my spiritual awakening in Winnipeg, Manitoba, March the 15th, 1974. I was in this hotel with my husband. Up to this day, I don't even know who paid for our room at the Winnipeg Inn. And my husband was passed out on a bed. And of course, me, I broke into the liquor cabinet. I took a bottle of 26-ounce whiskey. I made myself a drink. And then the second glass, I was sitting there. I was drunk and whatnot. This person was talking to me in Blackfoot and said, "Tsanistis kiagit sawatsim, kido kumayag sawatsim." In English, this person told me, "When are you going to quit drinking?" You know, he went on and on. I didn't even finish that second glass of mix. I went into the bathroom, I spilled it out. That was my last drink. I was on Skid Road in Calgary. I was on Skid Road in Winnipeg with my husband. So I kept hearing that voice. I told Francis, I'm just going to go to the detox. He didn't believe me, but I went for treatment, came out, and I started going to Alcoholics Anonymous. I really give a lot of credit to the AA program because it's so simple when they believe in a higher power. That's what I needed. While I was in treatment, there were times I felt like running out of there because I couldn't even speak at these sessions we had. I was so scared. I was always in fear because those things came back from residential school. I lived in fear for 14 years. And that's how come when I look at my life, the kind of a life I had, I was really pleading to the Creator. I'll do anything. Gonna give my life to you to help people, regardless of color. I worked in so many different places in Calgary. I worked at a detox center. I was a probation officer. I worked in child welfare. Everything, the work I did was for people from all walks of life. Because when you look at hurt and pain, it's not just about us First Nations. It's right across the board. We have to understand what those issues do to us. Especially when I worked at the Rent-Free Recovery Center. We had lawyers, we had professional people. But when something happens to you, what do? We go take a drink to hide that pain. So that's what I always think about. You know, my life, I'm 75 years old. Where would I be today? All my siblings, my brothers, passed away. They died from not having that opportunity to heal, because they did suffer the same kind of abuse I suffered at residential school. I had a sister who was murdered August 1970 in Siksika. One of my best friends was from Hobima, Velma Lewis Grey Eyes. She was murdered in Calgary, and we found her in her basement. Her file was closed. I had a niece who was killed in Calgary, same thing. So all these things that happened to me and happened to my loved ones, that's how come I'm still doing this work today. I dedicated my life to our women, children, because they really need a lot of help. And I really like the name of this meeting, Reclaiming. We have to really look at reclaiming ourselves, our spirit. It's so important because our spirit was taken away, and in Blackfoot, elders said, they did something to our spirit, and I really believe that's what happened. I'm only one out of how many survivors across Canada? And how many have we lost? Women, children. That's how come, for me, I find it very self-rewarding, self-fulfilling, that I gave my life to help our women. It took me a long time. And my father told me after my sister died, August 70, at some point in time, Kukuna, my girl, you're going to have to forgive this man. I thought, and I had so much respect for my father. My father was a member of the Horn Society, my mother. They were all in those sacred societies in Siksika. So I grew up with it. And he always told me, you have to forgive. Just let it go. Stomach boots it. You're not going to get anything out of it by hating the man that killed your sister. Took me a long time. Because listening to my father, especially him being in those societies, and took me a while, and my late cousin, Ruth Scalplock, same thing. You've got to forgive him. Took me a while. When that man came out of prison, there was a powwow in Calgary. That man came to shake my father's hand, Alec and myself. I was very hesitant to shake this man's hand, because deep in here I was still hurt. That anger, that hatred. I forced myself to shake his hand after. It was just shaking in here. Can you imagine? I went to the washroom and I cried and cried. Can honestly say that was the day when I forgave this man. My father always told us to forgive, Don't hang on to anger. Don't hang on to hatred. You have to let it go. And then I was working in a shelter in Calgary, and I knew this place did not really fulfill the needs of our women, especially the traditional spiritual ways. That one night I came to work midnight, and the counselors, they were all whispering to each other, and I walked into the intake room and I asked them, like, what's going on here? How come you workers are whispering? Oh, I think so-and-so is burning, no, I think she's smoking dope. And I told that worker, well, come with me. And I knew that woman wasn't smoking dope. We went, this woman was burning sweetgrass. And I chuckled. They were going to kick her out. I kept documenting everything. And while all that time I was working there, I had a vision to start our own shelter. It took 8 years. But I always say, when you believe in something that's going to benefit mankind, it's going to take time. Elders say, it's going to take time according to Spirit's time. If it wasn't for my late brother, Ralph Klein. Ralph was my traditional brother. He was adopted by the same elder in Siksika. Ralph Klein really helped to get the shelter going. And it's still going. 26 years they celebrated AwoTaan shelter. And another person I always talk about is Strader Crowfoot. He was our chief. And I'm going to be back up here on Friday. Strader put me on this committee to represent 3 to 7. It's called the Three Ego Wellness Society. This society started February 1991. So everything I do has to do with prevention, promoting wellness for our people. It takes a lot of dedication, a lot of prayers to keep going. And I know, my time in this world has a lot to do with helping people. And I'm still doing this kind of work back home. And I always feel there's so much work to do, especially for our young people. Women are so sacred. I was brought up with that value, because growing up as a young girl, my grandmother, my mother, what they taught me. Women are leaders, and we have to treat them, because we women are very sacred. We gave life. We do so many things for our children, grandchildren, and in our culture, we adopt children, not legally. Like I have so many adopted children today. I have so many adopted grandchildren. One of them is Theo Fleury, the former hockey star. He came into my life, and I was told by Spirit, this man is so lost, you're gonna have to take him under your wing. Today, he always said, Grandma, I know you speak to people, whatnot. Don't forget to mention me. He likes I could just laugh at him and whatnot. But anyway, his Blackfoot name is Ikinokputa, light fall and snow. remember him on the ice. He was like a blizzard. Over those years, when he came into my life, I took my grandsons to his hockey school in Calgary. The very first time I met him, he was sitting there. He had his nose up in the air. I was just kind of smiling, never said nothing. But it took time for him and I to connect. Today, he's so thankful. He found his native spirituality in Siksika. He's always so proud to say, I'm from Siksika. My grandma is Ruth Scalplock. Well, he's Cree, like me. I'm half Cree. So he's doing such a good job today. It's so good when you really look at yourself. And to tell you, we're all good people. It's just that we have to change our behavior, our attitude, with the help of the Creator. He can do so many wonderful things for you. Like, I'm not a Christian, whatnot. I'm a strong believer of our way, Siksika way, the traditional way. Because we don't place judgment on anybody, we accept everybody, whatnot, and that's the way it should be, to accept each other. Because, like, I run into so many people that like to judge. They look down at you. They don't even give us an opportunity to get to know who we are, because we have so much to offer, so much to share with them, give them the awareness and whatnot. Like, we could go on and on, how we can be helpful in society. And that's how come there's so many good things now, finally. Look at the TRC. Look at this thing about missing and murdered women. Everything that's happening now. It's about time. It's about time institutions, they start asking our elders, our people to come and help. It's been long overdue, because we're the First Nations in this country. When we opened the shelter, March the 10th, 1993, my grandmother turned 100 years old. She gave me the name AwoTaan, Shield Woman, because in a holy sun dance at Siksika, they received the shield at a Blackfoot Sundance. How sacred the shield. That's my Blackfoot name, AwoTaan. And my grandmother said, that name is going to carry you for a long time. It's going to protect you. Nothing will ever hit you. Because this is a tough job, thinking about our women. And after we had the opening, we had elders and chiefs from 3 to 7. They came to the opening. We had a big celebration. And I told Grandma, we're going to take you out for supper at a white spot. So we went, and she said, Kukuna, can I get something like strong to drink? That's okay, nagsibib something. Just okay. So she ordered. And then we ate. And I went to the cashier, came back. I left some money under the saucer. She took that money, she put it in her pocket. She got after me and she said, where did you leave this money? Get what's up, you're crazy, where did you put this money? She always liked to scold me. And I said, well, when a waiter or waitress serves you well, you pay your bill, you give them a little bit of extra. Oh, did she ever get mad at me? Gidawatsaps, they stole our land. because she was quite a lady. But anyway, this past summer, my older sister Eve, she gave me a new Blackfoot name, long-time Beaver woman, Siksika Nation. And I have a little great-granddaughter. She's 18 months old. A few months ago, I transferred AwoTaan Healing to her because Grandma said, this legacy of the shield has to keep going. And she said you could give it to one of your daughters, one of your granddaughter, or great-granddaughter. So my little Harper has AwoTaan Healing. You went through the ceremony because I always followed what those teachings were given to me, because those teachings are very sacred. And it's scary to write a book. My book is pretty well all over the world. And 10 times it won the bestseller in Calgary. And I speak at different places. I always promote like healthy and wellness for people, for everybody. So for me, I had a hard life. I really had to do something about my life. And I always think of our young people. We have to have something for them. And I worked at the court in Siksika. I was on a contract. And it's so pathetic, our young people, the charges that they're faced with. And look at the impact. I think this young generation are suffering the most. Yeah, we've got to pull together and really do something for them, because we have to think of them in the future. That's how come, like I pray for these young people every morning, every evening. So for me, I really appreciate coming up here. I sure had fun with my sister on the bus. We were just laughing. Well, that's what keeps us going, is our laughter, First Nations people. Because I remember those days when I was on the streets. Laughter kept me going. Otherwise, I wouldn't have found my way to have that good life, to share with what I went through. I never paint a pretty picture of my life. And I always believe that there's hope. We have to really pull together. And it's so good to be here. So good to meet you, Marion. I'm really happy to meet you. And all you people. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
Ruth, your struggles with adversity, pain, and trauma, and the suffering that you've endured, you've accomplished so much. And just as your namesake will carry on a legacy, there are many Indigenous women who will carry on the legacy of your work. So I had an and thank you for being such a leader and powerful, and for being so determined to make change. Ruth Scalplock, ladies and gentlemen. And now I would like to invite Katie Hickman up from the Alberta Council of Women's Shelters. This is the place and space that does extraordinary things for women who need help. So please help me welcome Katie. Welcome our honored guest.
Good evening. Thank you so much for being here tonight. As Jody said, my name is Katie. I'm the Education and Program Development Advisor with the Alberta Council of Women's Shelters. And really, we do the good work, but it's really informed, and the best work is done by our 39 members that are serving women, children, and seniors across the province, housing them, finding them resources. So say thank you to them. I would also firstly like to say thank you so much to the Bearhead Sisters for your song. I still have goosebumps from it. And I'd also like to thank Elder Ruth Scalplock for her prayer and her words. It's honestly always an honor to be able to listen and learn from her vast experience. She not only founded a uniquely Indigenous women's shelters in the AwoTaan Healing Lodge, but she's made her life's work helping and healing Indigenous women, children, families, and communities. And it's always an honor to be in her presence. Secondly, I would like to acknowledge the Government of Alberta for their financial support in ACWS's journey towards reconciliation, and Dion Kennedy, who's here tonight representing them. I'd also like to acknowledge a few of the agencies and individuals who really supported ACWS in putting this event on. The City of Edmonton Indigenous Relations Office, who supplied the lovely dinner that nourished us tonight. Also the Indigenous Center at MacEwan University for providing some cultural and logistical supports for us. The MacEwan Office of Sexual Violence Prevention, Education and Response, they have provided an on-site counselor. If anyone during the evening feels like they need some support and would like to speak to someone, we have our lovely Natalie. Just ask her to raise her hand there. She'll be watching if someone leaves the theater, she'll come check on you. Or if you do need someone to talk to, you can get her attention, you can go say hi, and she's more than willing to chat and support. And I'd also like to say that if you do need some support after this, on the back of the program, there's a list of some Edmonton resources. So do take a program home with you. There's some resources if after today you do need some additional support. I'd also like to thank Homeward Trust for the keychains that Jody pointed out. Make sure you do take one on your way out, as well as Leonard Saddleback and Julia Gibson for leading our speakers in a pipe ceremony just prior to this, and also blessing the keychains that Homeward Trust provided. And I'd like to thank Ambrose Place, and particularly April, for coming and volunteering with us today. I'd also once again like to acknowledge our members. We have 39 members in Alberta, 2 on reserve, and I know some are here today from Calgary, Tabor, High Level, and I know from other places. And I'd like to thank everyone that journeyed from far today. I know winter in Alberta isn't always safe, so I really appreciate, and it shows the commitment to this issue that you have to make that journey. So reconciliation is a very in vogue word at the moment. The Alberta Council of Women's Shelters believes the work of reconciliation is based in a strong commitment, consistency, relationship building, and most importantly, taking action. So commitment begins with a frame of understanding that will provide consistency, encourage that relationship building, and drive action. The ACWS has a statement of principles, values, and commitments to action for Indigenous women, girls, and their families, and that serves as ACWS's frame. It is and will remain a work in progress that was developed with our members as we walk this path with the women, families, and communities that we serve. Our statement of principles, values, and commitments to action was created in response to the Truth and Reconciliation's 94 calls to action, and it marks the beginning of a new phase of our journey in reconciliation. And I really see this event as a renewal of our commitment and the beginning of another phase. It's never over, it just keeps going. So it seems very fitting to me that we'll also be talking tonight about how we as an organization, as individuals, especially in the social services sector, can advance the 231 calls for justice that are in the final report from the National Inquiry for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. And I also hope that tonight can be a renewal of commitment for everyone in this room to seeking justice for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, because it's imperative for all of us to act. And indeed, we must act. So according to the final report, the second highest number of cases were here in Alberta. As I said, ACWS works with 39 members, including 2 members on reserve, the Sucker Creek Women's Emergency Shelter and Eagle's Nest Stony Family Shelter. And their experiences of our members and the women and children and seniors that they serve inform the core of everything that ACWS knows and everything that we do. And the report also says that this country is at war, and Indigenous women, girls, and the 2S LGBTQA people are under siege. And we know from the experiences of our members that this is true. They see it every day, and they know it must end. The Alberta Council of Women's Shelters is committed to the work of reducing the assumptions, the social practices, and the actions that contribute to this siege, to this war, that we now acknowledge as genocide. One way we work towards this change is advocacy. There is an unacceptable disparity in funding between our on-reserve shelters and our off-reserve shelters, and the federal government must address this immediately. We will support our sisters on reserve in any way they wish as they struggle for parity with our provincially funded counterparts. In our Walking with the Path Together project, we saw that providing high-quality, culturally competent, one-on-one supports to children and families on reserve that are experiencing violence where they live has more than a 5-to-1 social return on investment. The resource created with the support from the 5 on-reserve shelters that participated in this project are all available online on our website, but ongoing funding for this initiative from provincial and federal governments never materialized. Another way we work towards change is our Conversations with Louis Cardinal video series and its companion Stepping into the Circle. Together, they are a call to conversation and a workbook for helpers that support victims of family and domestic violence. They serve as a first step for staff, volunteers, and organizational learning on Indigenous history, culture, and knowledge. And it was created for ACWS members in mind, but we invite everyone to use them. They're available on our website and embark on this learning journey with us. We just released our second module and we'll be releasing one a month until May 2020. I'll just close with this. So on Sunday, I had the opportunity to attend a December 6th memorial breakfast, and I was so struck by the prayer that the elder Linda Robinson said that I asked to borrow some of her words, and she gave me her full permission to quote some of her prayer here today. Creator, we pray for the family of missing and murdered women and girls that they may find closure. Creator, we pray that women's voices may be heard and taken into account in all peace and reconciliation work. Creator, we pray for the transformation of societies, which often find it easier to judge the victims of violence than to solve the problems of injustice. I would now like to introduce our special guest this evening, who has made her life's work to see the transformation to right injustice. Most recently as Commissioner of the Inquiry into Missing Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, Marion Buehler. So Chief Commissioner Buehler is Cree and a member of the Mistawasis First Nation in Saskatchewan. In 1994, Chief Commissioner Buehler was the first Indigenous woman appointed to the Provincial Court as judge in British Columbia. Prior to being appointed, the Chief Commissioner worked in civil and criminal law. She was Commission Counsel for the Caribou-Chilcotin Justice Inquiry. She served as President and Director of the Indigenous Bar Association in Canada, the BC Police Commission, the Law Courts Education Society, and the Law Foundation of British Columbia. Chief Commissioner Buehler has lectured and written extensively about Indigenous issues and rights. In 2006, she initiated the First Nations courts in BC. Chief Commissioner Buehler received both her undergrad and law degrees at the University of Victoria, and then she retired as a judge in 2016 in order to lead this commission. So please help me in welcoming Chief Commissioner Marion Buehler.
Wow, that's an Alberta welcome. Well, thank you. Thank you, Katie, very much. First of all, I want to acknowledge the spirits of the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and I welcome them to join us this evening. I also want to acknowledge the special challenges and strengths experienced and shown by survivors of violence. Thank you. And also the members of the LGBTQ2S communities who have their own special challenges every day. So I'm glad we're in a big room, because that means there's room for the spirits of all of the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, because there are a lot of them. I also acknowledge that we're on the land of Treaty 6, and I'm glad to be back on treaty territory. I know that this is homeland for so many First Nations people, Métis people, and Inuit people. I want to acknowledge the elders in the room today. Thank you. And Ruth, thank you for inspiring all of us through your prayer and through your life experience that you shared with us today. It's very valuable. Thank you to the Alberta Council of Women's Shelters. And Katie, thank you for holding my hand through much of today. It's been great. I'm going to be talking about some really difficult subjects today. And I want you, if you're not feeling well, to certainly take advantage of the help that Natalie can give you today. Bearhead Sisters, wow, you're awesome. Thank you so much for starting us with some great music and energizing us as well. I want to also thank all of you for being here tonight. Thank you for caring about Indigenous women and girls, 2S people in Canada. Thank you for wanting to make this a better country. Well, let's talk a little bit about the National Inquiry. And I'm going to explain what you're going to be seeing over my head as the evening progresses. This is a group of slides, photographs from several of our hearings, as well as it'll give you some of the numbers involved in our work. With any sort of luck, this is actually going to work. I'm a very low-tech person in a high-tech world. It was truly an honor and privilege for me to be Chief Commissioner and to be able to do this important work. It was a mission for me. It still is, obviously. I finished technically at the end of June, but this is a passion for me. Justice and freedom has been a common theme in my life. The National Inquiry came about as a result of, believe it or not, about 40 years of activism by grassroots people, frontline workers, who insisted that the war on our women has to stop. Also, Canada has been embarrassed internationally because of the number of women, Indigenous women and girls who have gone missing. A country that purports to stand for human rights and freedom and respect has been shamed. Our terms of reference can be paraphrased as this: to inquire into all systemic causes of all types of violence against Indigenous women and girls, and to make recommendations to end that violence. Also, we were to be reminded of commemoration. How can we best honor the lost loved ones and honor the courage of survivors? Sounds pretty simple, doesn't it? Boy, it wasn't, I'll tell you. This was the first truly national inquiry. I won't bore you with the legalities of our work, but we were actually 14 different inquiries. We were incorporated, for lack of better words, in every province and territory, as well as nationally. We had 30 months in which to do our work. So let me tell you a little bit about the work, because it was amazing. It was life-changing. It was transformative. It was a tremendous burden at times, and it was also a tremendous gift, a wonderful learning experience. We heard from family members of lost loved ones and survivors from coast to coast to coast. We heard their truths. In total, we heard from 2,386 people across Canada about their lost loved ones. Now, it could have been in a public hearing, it could have been privately, it could have been through artistic expression. And many family members just didn't feel ready to share in a hearing with a commissioner or statement gatherer, so they sent us beautiful letters and cards and drawings about their lost loved ones. Some of those letters were the most moving letters I've ever read in my whole life. They came from the heart and shared grief, but also shared hope for a better future. We had 15 community hearings in which we heard from survivors and family members of lost loved ones. The inquiry went to, seems like yesterday, Vancouver, Smithers, Whitehorse, Edmonton, Calgary, Saskatoon, Winnipeg, Thunder Bay, Yellowknife, Rankin Inlet, Happy Valley, Goose Bay, Winnipeg, Membertou, Maliotinam, and Montreal. Hearing the pain, the grief, and the loss was moving, to say the least. But we also heard at the same time about resilience and hope for a better future, just like Ruth told us today. We've heard about survivors of violence and how they've rebuilt their lives. We heard from family members who have moved on, who have commemorated their lost loved ones. We've heard from families who all as a group went for treatment and are living healthy lifestyles. Since the end of the inquiry, we're still hearing good news. In fact, the commissioners and I still compare notes fairly regularly about success stories. We've heard about families who have been reunited with their lost loved ones after 20 and 30 years. And I heard of two just late last week, two incidents where the family members and the lost loved ones, the missing loved one, were only blocks apart in the same city. We also heard about children being returned to their families. We've also heard about people coming forward, finding their voice, reclaiming their voice, and making complaints and charges against their abusers. We've heard about investigations being reopened by the police and good results about that. And we've heard about coroners reopening their files and re-examining the work that they did do and the conclusions they came to. In short, the truths shared by the family members and survivors rewrote Canadian history. They shared their secrets in public, often through tears so profound it's hard to describe. But they did that because they didn't want what happened to them to happen to any other Canadian, Indigenous or not. We also had 9 expert or traditional knowledge keeper hearings, and those witnesses educated us about Indigenous laws, decolonizing perspectives, the importance of a human rights framework in doing our work. We heard about government services, some of which work very well, some of which don't. We heard about racism. We heard about issues in policing. We heard about the impacts of colonial violence. We looked into the criminal justice system. We looked also into family and child welfare. I'll tell you, the last one was a real eye-opener for me. We learned about sexual exploitation, the sex industry, and human trafficking. I had no idea, even after 22 years as a judge, the extent of human trafficking in Canada, and I'm still shocked by it. We also went to all of the federal penitentiaries for women in Canada. We went to the Forensic Psychiatric Center in Saskatoon. At all locations, we spoke to the women, inmates, to staff, and to elders. Part of the national inquiry that didn't make a lot of headlines were all of the parties withstanding. There were over 100, the largest ever in Canada. These are organizations, governments, agencies who participated in the hearings and provided written submissions. And I see a couple of familiar faces in the room, and I have to shout out my praise to all of the parties withstanding who held our feet to the fire and made the national inquiry the success it has been. We had advisory groups, both within the national inquiry, through our staff, and externally as well. We had, because we knew there were special issues that had to be addressed. So we had Inuit, Métis, 2S, advisory groups, as well as a special advisory group for Quebec and a forensic review team. We also had, as we did our work, validation groups. So we go back to these groups and say, did we get this right? Have we missed something? Have we made a mistake? Have we misinterpreted something? Our validation groups, again, were Inuit specific, Métis specific, 2S specific. We had a group in Quebec as well with the Quebec report. And we also had our beloved National Family Advisory Council, or Circle rather. These are people who were family members of lost loved ones and survivors of violence themselves from coast to coast to coast, who made sure that families were first in all of the work that we did do. And much of our success is attributable to the participation of the National Family Advisory Circle. They were amazing. We produced an interim report in November 2017 on time. And I have to say, pause for a moment because this was entirely out of the public view. We had a brilliant research team who did an amazing job of synthesizing existing research, almost 1,000 reports, and putting that in a really easy to read interim report. Then they continued to do research and were able to capture our vision, the Commissioner's vision, as well as NFAC and others, in our final report. I can't praise them enough. The sad part is they worked at computer monitors, they worked in little rooms, and they weren't in the public. And I wish the public could see the hard work that they put in the tremendously long hours. We also produced an education guide called Their Voices Shall Guide Us. And this is age-appropriate curricula information for kindergarten to post-secondary about violence against Indigenous women and girls. I want to tell you about what we did differently in this national inquiry. I've been a commission counsel in the past, and I've been a presenter at national inquiries in British Columbia, and also as a judge. Now, that quilt is one example, and you'll see more as they come along. Oh, that's me and Kathy Lewis, my grandmother. That was in Smithers. I wanted to put a human face on our work because that was our work. It was humanity, it was people, and still is. So what did we do differently? Well, from the very beginning, I said, okay, we might not break laws, but we're going to bend them seriously. So the first rule was there will be no cross-examination of families and survivors. We have to move away from that mentality. They're there to share their truths. No cross-examination, thank you very much. I was expecting a challenge in court from governments, fully expecting that for no cross-examination, but fortunately those court challenges never happened, at least on that topic. I said we were going to accept evidence in any way we would have it, be it through song, be it through prayer, be it through letters, artistic contributions, evidence, testimony. We'll take it however we get it. We would take a very broad definition of family, because we know in the Indigenous world, family is a fluid concept. Everybody's inside, I think everybody in Saskatchewan's my cousin, or at least they say they are. We wanted to look beyond the nuclear family as such, and we said, let's look at the family of the heart. That's your street family, your adopted family, your foster family, your nuclear family, your extended family, your blood family. Let's be inclusive of as many people as we can. It was a no-brainer that we had to include 2S LGBTQIA people. No-brainer. I wish I didn't have to say this as something that we felt that we had to include. It should be a no-brainer every day. From beginning to end, we provided health supports and aftercare. I really wanted at every hearing for it to be as unlegal as possible and to be more like you or Ruth or someone in the back row having tea with me at my kitchen table to talk about your lost loved one. That's the atmosphere I wanted to have. So you'll see in some of these pictures, quilts. I'll come to the grandmothers in a moment because they're worth a big explanation. But we were told by our grandmothers the best way of welcoming people, be it in the north, south, east, or west, is to make them feel warm and hugged. And so we put out a call for quilts. And we received at the last count, over 60 of them. They came from community centers, they came from penitentiaries, they came from some shelters, actually, some here in Alberta. And those quilts were at every type of event that we had. And sometimes they were used, more often than not, to wrap, to blanket families and survivors and their pain, and to help them to be strong and feel loved. As I said, we had the National Family Advisory Circle, and these were family members and survivors from across Canada. We needed their advice about moving forward. These are the people who had worked for 40 years in some cases to make this national inquiry happen. We needed their help to make sure that voices all across Canada were heard in a good way. We needed them to validate our report. We needed them to keep us pointed in the right direction and for us to have the right priorities. And I'm grateful for every one of them, even though at times it might not have been that way. The commissioners and I each had our own grandmothers. We knew going into this that it would be very hard work, not only physically, like the commuting and the travel was really quite something, but we also knew that spiritually this would be difficult for us. Our grandmothers kept us grounded spiritually and culturally. They also made sure that we didn't eat too many sweets and made sure we had a cup of tea when we were supposed to. They gave us a pat on the back when we deserved it, and they gave us a scolding when we deserved it as well. We couldn't have done our work in a good way and come out at the end of the report as healthy as we have without the help of our grandmothers. Everywhere we went, our work was grounded in ceremony. We participated in and respected ceremonies of every territory where we went. Our work started and stopped in ceremony. Our final report started and was turned over in ceremony. We always believed in the Indigenous concept of reciprocity, so everyone who came to share their truths with us received an eagle feather. Because the matriarchs on Haida Gwaii said we had to do this, because they certainly saw the suffering and the pain experienced by family members and survivors who came to hearings. And I think there's one constant across Canada amongst Indigenous people, that feathers, be it eagle feather or from a different bird, are to give you strength, to lift you up on the days when you need lifting up, when your spirit is down and your spirit needs to be lifted up. And on those days when you're feeling good, the eagle feather will help lift you up and help you fly to places higher than you ever imagined that you could. We hear back from people about their eagle feathers, even now. We were able to utilize people that we called statement gatherers. These were individuals who went where we couldn't go. We left a big footprint wherever we went, and we required a lot of hotel rooms, as you can imagine, a lot of electrical plugs, and a lot of other stuff to keep the inquiry going. Statement gatherers didn't require quite so much stuff to go. So where we couldn't go, they went. Because we knew there were people in communities, maybe one or two people in a community, who very much wanted to share their truths with us, but for a variety of reasons couldn't leave their communities. But their communities didn't have the supports for us to go in. So statement gatherers went. They went all over Canada. And they did the hard work. They met with people in gas stations. They met with people in cafes. They went with people in their own homes to gather the truths. We also relied heavily on traditional knowledge keepers, and we honored them throughout our work. We knew that we had to rely on elders to keep us focused. So that's a little bit about what we did differently. And I hope you're seeing in some of the slides, oh, there's a group of us, and you can see the quilts in the background. And you'll see that every hearing that we had a kulik, because we know Inuit people are all across Canada, and we wanted them to feel welcome. So I want to talk now a little bit about our final report. It's big. It's heavy reading, not only in terms of number of pages, but in terms of content. If you can only go through the executive summary that's still available on our website, do that, please. It's a good beginning. I think it's important to understand the evidentiary basis, I know it's a legal term, but the evidence, the foundation upon which we made our findings of fact and made our calls for justice. There are 231 calls for justice. Some are geared only at governments. And they have to do with culture, health and wellness, human security, and justice. Those are the 4 areas that we grouped our findings as well as our calls for justice to the governments. Now, it's important to know that in our final report, all governments includes Indigenous governments because they need to be held accountable too. We also made calls for justice directed at media and social influencers. And I just want to tell you an interesting little story. When we had the hearings, community hearings across Canada, where families and survivors were sharing their truths with us, there was media everywhere, to the point where we had to ask the media to stand back and let the family members just have a few moments, or longer if they needed, to just decompress after sharing their truths with us. On the day that we had the hearing regarding racism, and specifically the media, one outlet was present. Am I surprised? No, because the media doesn't want to know the truth about themselves. We also directed calls for justice to health and wellness service providers because we heard about racism in hospitals and the health system. We made calls for justice directed at transportation service providers and the hospitality industry because they're on the front lines for identifying human trafficking. We made calls for justice directed at police services, also attorneys and law societies, educators, those involved in child welfare, those involved in extractive and development industries, because we know what happens to the earth happens to our souls, our spirits. We also made calls for justice directed at Correctional Service Canada. I just want to share a little experience with you. I went to the penitentiary for women in Edmonton, and it was an eye-opener for me. I was and still am shocked at the number of young women serving federal sentences at that penitentiary, because to me it was like going to a high school campus. They all were so young. We also made calls for justice directed at all Canadians so that all Canadians can participate. Then we went on to make distinction-based calls for justice that were Inuit-specific, Métis-specific, 2S LGBTQIA-specific. We have a separate Quebec report, or a supplement on Quebec, and we had the separate forensic document review report. We also produced a supplementary report on genocide because we knew that was going to ruffle a few feathers. So, let's turn now to lessons learned. First, the silence has to stop. We can't keep secrets anymore. One of our witnesses said, you know, Chief Commissioner, there's a conspiracy of silence in our communities to hide the violence, not only from ourselves and each other, and to deny that violence, but to hide that violence from outsiders. That silence simply has to stop. We have to know the truth about Indigenous women and girls and 2S people. We have to know the truth about the violence that they experience on a day-to-day basis. We, as individuals, as organizations, as governments, and as a country, need to strengthen and support Indigenous women and girls because it's time to reclaim place and power. We need to know that domestic violence or intimate partner violence takes place more often than not behind closed doors. And we also have to recognize that a lot of people want to keep those doors closed. A lot of organizations want to keep those doors closed. But we can't do that anymore. We also have to accept that we as a society, as a country, have not given Indigenous women and girls and 2S people realistic alternatives to escape violence. Shelters, safe houses are a good beginning, but they're not available in the north. Women have no safe place to go, so they live in violence with their children. We haven't given Indigenous women and 2S people alternatives to poverty, so we criminalize them for being poor. We take their children away from them, not because they're bad parents, not because they don't love their children, because they're poor. That's why. Women have to stay in violence because there's no transportation. There's no safe way to get out of their communities. And even if they got out of their communities, there's no safe place for them to go, save and except the shelters here in Alberta. We have to stop punishing Indigenous women, 2S people, for being poor. But that poverty comes from colonization, generations of colonization and of deliberate underfunding by governments. Keep them poor, keep them marginalized, keep them out of the public eye. It's not a nice thing to say in a country that seems to stand internationally for human rights and fairness and equality. But it's the truth. And you can't deny the truth. And so many people said to us in the course of our inquiry, the truth hurts. We also learned, it was abundantly clear to us, that funding by project or by fiscal year handicaps service providers, regardless of the type of service you're providing, and does not recognize human rights. It continues marginalization of people. It keeps them poor. It keeps them on the margin. It keeps them out of the public eye. We have to understand that safety, housing, clean water, and a myriad of other things most Canadians take for granted are human rights. They're not projects. They're not programs. They're human rights that must be respected and must be properly funded. We need to take that human rights lens and look through that lens in everything we do. It isn't a gift that the government is giving us. It isn't going cap in hand to the government and asking for money. It's the government's responsibility and duty, legally, to recognize, honor, and appropriately fund human rights. Doesn't matter whose human right it is, but especially for Indigenous women and girls. Honoring human rights must always be in partnership with Indigenous people. As we heard so often, don't do to us or don't do for us anymore, do with us. I'm going to raise two particular issues that still bother me. The first one is victim blaming, what commonly is also known as laissez-faire racism. Well, they don't pay any income tax, so it serves them right. Or they already get enough handouts from the government, so it serves them right. What more should we do? What can we do? It's a form of racism. And that's victim blaming. It's so wrong because it shows ignorance of the true history of Canada. Also, I want to stop the inaccurate portrayal of Indigenous women and girls in the media. How often have you read that somebody's missing and she was a drug addict and street entrenched and or a prostitute and or all of the above? And or violent is another one. That same woman, in all likelihood, was a mom with kids she loved, a sister, a cousin, some cases even a grandma, who have gone missing. They're not, they are real people. And I hope we all stand up to inaccurate portrayals of Indigenous women and girls in the media. Human trafficking, another area. That's human behavior at just about its lowest possible point. Because it means that Indigenous women and girls, 2S people, are being treated like chattel, like property, like bargaining chips, like disposable property. That has to stop. But there is good news. We heard about tremendous resilience and strength on the part of families and survivors. You've heard Ruth this afternoon, or this evening, her tremendous resilience and strength. She's one of many, although she's very special. Women, girls, 2S people across Canada are reclaiming their power, finding their voice and reclaiming their positions in their communities. As I said earlier, we've heard about women who have rebuilt their lives. Ruth is a great example. They've charged their abusers. They've gone back to school. Their children have been returned to them. Lost loved ones have been found as recently as last week. We have gained allies all across Canada, and I welcome every last one of them, every last one of you. Thank you for caring. Thank you for standing up. Thank you for walking with us. I've met some young leaders, some Indigenous leaders that would just knock your socks off. They're brilliant, they're committed, they have energy, and they have hope. And they're going to lead us to great things, whether we want to be led or not. So, what to do next after talking about the young leaders? Well, I'm going to ask you, as I already have, to read, if nothing else, the executive summary, so you understand the truth. Because the first step in reconciliation is to know the truth. And you will find one thing in that executive summary and in one of the 231 calls for justice that will light a fire in you. One fire, but they'll probably light more than one fire. Embrace that fire in you and do one thing. Not asking you to change the world, but one thing. Now, that may be building new relationships with police in your community, building new relationships with social workers and child protection people in your community, healthcare providers in your community, for example. It may also mean looking inward at your own organization. Are you inadvertently creating barriers for Indigenous people to join your organization and stay in your organization? Use your voice. Use the one voice that Creator gave you to speak up and speak out against sexism, racism, misogyny, transphobia, homophobia. Zero tolerance. Just do one thing. Because if everybody in this room just did one thing as a result of the national inquiry, think of the amazing province you would be living in, the amazing community you would be living in. A lot of people doing one thing amounts to tremendous human change. But once you get on a roll, you may find it's more than one thing that you want to do. Reconciliation, in my view, and I could be wrong, is about having conversations with people you never had conversations with before, about topics you never talked about before. Have those conversations. They'll be difficult at times, but we have to have them. Just one thing, that's all I ask of you. Thank you very much for caring. Thank you very much for listening. And I'll be watching for one thing to happen from all of you. Thank you so much. It's been a real honor to be with you this evening. First of all, thank you for asking that. It's a difficult question to answer because I think 22 years as a judge really toughened me up. Because you know when you walk into a courtroom, at least half of the people in the room are going to be mad at you. But where I found the strength was in my culture and my spiritual beliefs.
I saw a question earlier, and I thought it was a great one. They had asked, in 100 years' time, what is the message that you hope is taken from all of this work?
Who asked that question? Well, I put it in terms of my granddaughter's grandchildren. So maybe that is about 100 years. That was as a result of the work that we did at the National Inquiry and the work at the TRC, that Canada woke up and Canada decided to change.
Wow, there's a lot of questions in here, you guys. So I don't think we're going to get through them all, but we're going to magically pick a few. So in your opinion, what is the best way to be an ally?
What is the best way to be an ally? I think an ally answered that question in Saskatoon, I believe it was. I may have the location incorrectly. And that's to come with an open mind and an open heart and to stand up for justice and to speak out against injustice, however you find it, wherever you find it. That's the best way.
I thought I was woke. Can you please elaborate on LGBTABC?
Okay, 2S LGBTQIA. 2S stands for true spirit, which is the traditional description of somebody who is not at one end or the other of the gender spectrum. L is lesbian. G is, gay, homosexual, bisexual is B. Q, transgender, queer is one of the Qs. The other Q, and I'm sorry if I'm getting this out of order, is, I'm sorry I've lost it. I have to write it out for, oh, no. Okay. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer. The second, or maybe it's the first Q, is query, unsure. I is on the spectrum. Intersex. Thank you very much. And A is asexual.
Awesome. Great question.
I have to write it out.
What do you say or think when your own Premier of Alberta doesn't acknowledge that there is a genocide in Canada?
A lot of people, not just the Premier, do not want to admit that there's a genocide still occurring in Canada because they don't know the truth. They haven't read the report. If they'd read the report, they would understand how and why we came to the conclusions that we did. It's pretty simple.
How do you take care of yourself doing this work?
Thank you for asking that question. We had our grandmothers to help us when we were faltering, and we relied on our grandmothers a lot, spiritually and culturally. We also knew the importance of rest and maintaining connections with our family, our own families, because we traveled so much. Kind of lost that grounding that you get with your own families. So we knew we had to do that. As I said, you know, being a provincial court judge toughens you up. You hear everything. And so I didn't hear a lot of things for the very first time, unfortunately.
Not only were you a provincial court judge, you were the first woman in British Columbia. Small things, small things. It seemed to me that you were not portrayed fairly by media. Was this your feeling? And if so, how did you cope with the pressure? What kept you strong?
Thank you. What kept me strong? My spiritual beliefs, my culture, the help, the commissioner, the commissioners, the staff, we all leaned on each other a lot to get through the work that we had to get through. I leaned on my family. My brother supported me without question. And I knew, again, from being a judge, that I was going to be misquoted. What I said would be mischaracterized. So it was a good job experience to have spent all that time as a judge, as it turns out.
What connections do you see between the policies and practices in schools and the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in Canada?
Thank you, whoever asked that question, because just in the last 5 years in British Columbia, anyway, I've seen a real change in curricula in schools. And now people are starting to understand history a little better about why poverty can drive people away from their social safety nets. I think that people now are starting to learn the real history of Canada and why so many of our women have gone missing and have been murdered. Education is critical.
What do you see the role of nonprofits being in responding to the truths and calls to action from the National Inquiry?
Oh, nonprofits have an important role. First of all, for holding governments to account. Nonprofits are in an excellent position to call out governments for simply not meeting their obligations under the calls for justice, and also in a position to know what's happening on the streets, what's happening on the front lines, what the truths are, and to tell governments when they have missed the mark on policies, procedures, and programs.
How can we support the children who are leaving foster care so that they don't become victims of MMIW? Adoption. I think you modeled it.
Well, you know, that's part of it. We have to, we're all one big family, and we all have to take care of our children. You know, it takes a whole village to raise children and keep them safe. Well, an 18-year-old to me is not an adult. An 18-year-old is still very much a child. And I think that we all have to make sure that children have the adequate resources and funding and guidance when they age out of care. And I think it's important, especially a role for nonprofits, to ensure that governments change the age at which children age out of care. Let's be realistic about that.
How do we best disrupt the systems of human trafficking?
Thank you, I think, for asking that question. You know, I'm still kind of stuck on human trafficking, and I'll tell you why. It's my own guilt. And I'll just share some stories. When I was a judge, I had several cases in court where now, with what I do know, those were human trafficking cases. And I feel badly that I wasn't properly educated and I didn't see the signs of human trafficking in those cases in court, where I had the opportunity to do something to stop the trafficking. So just a little disclosure there, a lot of my angst about human trafficking is my own guilt and my lack of education in the past. But I think what we have to do is educate ourselves, regardless of what type of work we're doing, about the signs of human trafficking. That's why we made calls for action for people in the transportation and hospitality industry, because they're very much the front lines. Hotel desk clerks need to know what human trafficking looks like and know when to call the police.
She's doing pretty good in cross-examination. You know, when she was talking about how they gifted everyone with an eagle feather, I thought, oh, there must be a lot of bald birds out there. Funny, not funny. How do we teach our girls to reconnect with their spirits once they have been trafficked and or sexually exploited?
Oh, time. Time and love and caring, support, however they need it, however they want it, when they want it. That's how. Everybody reclaims their place and reclaims their power in their own way, in their own speed, at their own speed. And we have to respect that, but provide the support and the strength for them to do that.
I think that's really beautiful, that honoring people in their own speed. I think often when we're in places of privilege, we just expect those who are wounded or hurt to catch up to us. And there's some real medicine there that we have to honor folks where they are at in their journey. So thank you for that insight. Can I access some of the inquiry interviews, and where would I do so?
Yes. Some of the live stream of the public hearings are still on our website. We provided the option of people sharing their truths in private, and those are not available. Those are under lock and key. But the public statements are still available on our website, and that's mmIWG-ffada.ca.
Do you have any comments on the just released Métis specific report by the women of the Métis Nation?
I'll be honest, I have only skimmed the report, but there are common themes between their report and ours, and I am very pleased that they continue to raise the profile of violence against Métis women and girls.
I'm not sure what this person is asking, but I'll interpret it. Can we get one standout comment? Oh, I get it. Sorry. Can we get one standout comment from a community member that you may recall from what you heard or read?
I'm just going to fumble through my notes for a moment, okay?
Just like a judge. Let me go through the evidence here.
I want to share some that have stayed with me, and there's more than one. There is a war on our women. I don't feel safe in my own home, my own community. Violence is normal in my life. I thought I could trust the police to keep me safe. I have no choice but to sell my body so I can feed my children and keep a roof over our heads. I was trafficked. I think those are all pretty profound.
And lastly, for folks in the audience who are doing this tough work of supporting family members or women, survivors, victims, what would be the one thread of hope that you would like to instill in our audience?
Well, it comes down to this: you just never know. ... or hashtag, you just never know. You just never know when 5 years later, or a year later, or 10 years later, someone will come back to you and say, thank you. Thank you for taking me in. Thank you for making sure that my mom got safe housing for all of us. You just never know who is going to do that and when. And my experience is quite often it's the one you least expect will come back to you and say thank you for what you did do. So just remember, you never know, do you? That's why there's always hope.
Well, Chief Commissioner doesn't live here, but I do, so I'm going to be watching your just one thing. Thank you all so much for joining us for a beautiful conversation with Chief Commissioner Marion R. Thank you so much for being with us. Ruth, thank you so much. Safe travels to your home fires. Remember, I'm watching just one thing.